Fundacja CFBT.pl zaprasza na podcast Projekt LIDER. Ambitnie o straży i nie tylko. Dobrze palona kawa ogniu. Kawa od strażaków i dla strażaków.
So I'm trying to figure out something for small talk from podcast kitchen of the podcast.
How long have you been doing this?
I don't often have a lot of time to do this, but I've recorded 7 episodes so far, I think.
Oh wow!
From 1 hour to 2.5 hours, and probably I started over a year ago. So like maybe 1 podcast per 2 months.
Good for you.
So it's not very frequent. I would like to do more, but it's only one.
Right.
It's only 24 hours in a day. So, it says I'm not sure how to say it. It's like maybe it's about firefighting and not only, because I would like to make it a little bit about leadership, a little about team building, motivation, also important topics
within the fire service.
Yeah, psychology or mental issues among firefighters as well, because that's also mental health and so on. So, but this one will be first English episode and the episode about cancer. I spoke to personal trainer, personal coach. I spoke to. Do you watch MMA?
Yes, yeah.
So there was a Polish female champion, Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Oh wow! Okay.
We used to live on the same street, so she accepted my invitation, and then she was talking about the mentality of people who achieve a lot. When you are defeated, how does that affect your ability to stand up and so on? What is important for her and so on? So about motivation. Okay. So we're ready to start.
We're ready to start.
All right. So. Hello, welcome in another episode of our podcast, Project LIDER. This time the podcast will be in English, so I'm really hoping that we will reach all the corners of the world with this one. This is a very important talk that we will have today, and I'm having with me a great guest today, Alex Forrest from Canada.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, how are you? It's a pleasure to have you. So Alex, we will start off in a very usual way. Maybe tell the audiences a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name's Alex Forrest. I've been a firefighter for 33 years out of Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I've also been a health and safety advocate for firefighter cancer issues for over 25 years. While I was a firefighter, I attained my law degree and became a lawyer as well. So I'm a lawyer firefighter. We all heard those stories about how fire halls all have fire hall lawyers. Well, I'm an actual lawyer and such, and I've used that expertise to be able to advance the issue of occupational cancer recognition for firefighters around the world.
Okay, so what made you move to having a lawyer or a law degree? Did you have interest in this early in your young days, or?
Well, what happened was I was a young firefighter, and I love firefighting, but I wanted a sort of a different challenge. So what I did is I basically changed all my day shifts to night shifts, and I had the honor of being able to attend law school in the University of Manitoba, and I went to law school for 3 years. I attained my law degree. I was called to the bar in 1996, and I've been a lawyer, a firefighter ever since. And I used that expertise to be able to assist me in assisting firefighters with occupational cancer, from everything from representing firefighters through workers' compensation to legislative drafting with countries around the world, and dealing with the science of occupational cancer and its tragic connection to firefighting.
I would say there aren't probably many firefighters, fire officers, lawyers in the world. How many do you know?
No, I have not met any other firefighter that was also a lawyer. I'm sure they're out there, but I have never. It is really quite interesting because as soon as I became a lawyer, firefighter, I actually practiced for a couple years as a firefighter. I haven't stopped firefighting ever since. And what happened was I was involved in the union at the time, and I attended one union meeting on this issue, and I was arguing with the union president, the next thing I know, the membership was voting me as president of the union there in Winnipeg.
That's good. That means that you were, emphasizing some things that were really in the hearts of the firefighters. Yes.
Oh yeah. Like I wanted to, because I couldn't become a firefighter unless I had firefighters that were helping me, changing shifts and everything. And I wanted to give something back to the firefighters, and I felt the union was the best way to do that. I didn't realize that I was going to be president there for 25 years. I have just stepped down from the presidency of Winnipeg Fire Department, but I'm also the president of the Manitoba Firefighters now, and I'm also the national rep. I am the Canadian trustee for the International Association of Firefighters, representing firefighters from coast to coast in Canada.
That's quite an impressive career. What strikes me is that every now and then we have an opportunity in our lives to take a decision that has the potential to influence our lives, and I understand that this decision was very impactful in your life, and because you selected a very rare combination, that's also opening like an opportunity for you to be a very highly appreciated expert connecting different fields.
Yeah, I've always been a person that was part of a team atmosphere. I was in the military before I joined the fire department, and my combination of law degree, being a firefighter, and also being a union president allowed me to, as you said, it opened up doors where it allowed me to go into and assist firefighters on a level that really wasn't there in the past, and we were very successful to be able to get presumptive cancer legislation where the province recognized that we were the first province in Canada to recognize occupational cancer and the profession of firefighting. And I couldn't have done that without my law degree, without my firefighting experience, and without myself being the union president.
Okay, so there's many things connecting here. Since this podcast that I'm doing is also focusing on motivation. Right. It's a motivational undertaking, so to say. So I'm trying to by talking to different people and showing how they're succeeded in whatever they pursued. I'm trying to motivate firefighters to being more decisive in their taking decisions. I mean, so to say, if there's something that interests you and you feel like you have something to say in this field and you want to develop in this field, go ahead, and in a couple of years it may really transform your life. Do you have a feeling that it was the case with you?
Yeah, I was always a person that loved taking on challenges, and I knew that you could accomplish anything if you put your mind behind it. And I had a tremendous team of firefighters, executive board members, a tremendous, Winnipeg Fire Department is a tremendous fire department. It's one of the busiest fire departments in Canada. It has a reputation that goes back to the 1880s, and that type of support allowed me to push it through. And one of the first things that occurred is, as soon as I became president of the United Firefighters of Winnipeg, I had noticed that we had an unbelievable number of firefighters that were dying of occupational cancer, and there wasn't any recognition. And when
that was around year 2000?
Yeah, around 1997, 1998, I started to do research into this, and then I found that there was really no recognition in Canada, very little recognition in the United States, and no recognition around the world for cancer when it came to firefighting. When I went to the medical community, they said, oh, firefighters may have more cancer because of other factors. They would say things such as firefighters were smokers, or firefighters had other lifestyle issues that involved them with cancer. But the more I researched into it, I realized it was because of the carcinogens that makes up smoke. And that's what propelled me into working with the government of Manitoba to create one of the first legislations in the world that recognized occupational cancer and firefighting, and that took place in 2002.
Oh, that's really early compared to other parts of the world. That's, well, you said it. You were the first, let's say, locality in the entire planet to actually start dealing with this?
Yeah, it was really amazing because we had to educate the politicians right from the start.
How did that go?
We had very little support from the medical community, but one thing we did have is we had the numbers. We could show that compared to the general population, firefighters, not only in Winnipeg but throughout Canada, were dying at cancer rates that were far exceeding what the rates were in Canada as a whole for the general population.
Okay, can I pause here?
Sure.
Because that's a very important argument. Did you have at the time any kind of registry, or how did you achieve these kinds of numbers, or are they just?
Well, Winnipeg was very unique because we had a very strong union, so we knew every single fire death, and all firefighters, retired and active, are part of our union. So every time a firefighter would die, we would know why they had died. We would have a ceremony for them, and in 1997, we actually had one of the first line of duty death funerals for a firefighter. So even before we got the legislation, we believed it ourselves. We had put forward that we were going to acknowledge cancer deaths within our fire service as occupational in nature. And we had put this forward, and unfortunately, because of the way that the law was set up, we weren't able to prove it in a court of law, but that's why we needed the legislation to be able to reverse the onus in regards to firefighters being covered for occupational cancer.
Okay. What is the word that you use? Reverse the
onus.
Onus. That's a legal term, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Like the reverse. In 2002, there was no firefighter legislation in Canada. What it did is through law school and through dealing with other law professors, when I had explained to them the issue of firefighter cancer and why we weren't able to prove it in a court of law, because when you go into a court of law, the onus was on the firefighter to say, I got cancer at this fire or that fire, but that's impossible because it's not one fire that kills us. It's hundreds of fires, the cumulative effect throughout our careers, and that was impossible to prove in a court of law. So what the legislation did is it switched the onus onto the city, onto the organization that was fighting the firefighter. So presumptive legislation at its simplest terms is if a firefighter has worked X number of years, for instance leukemia, if a firefighter works 5 years and that firefighter gets leukemia, it is deemed to be that cancer was from his occupation. And if anyone challenges that, the onus is on the challenging organization. So the firefighter was able to have his cancer covered in the same way as if it was a traumatic on-scene accident.
Okay.
So a firefighter in Manitoba in 2002 was covered in the same way as if a firefighter had fallen through the floor while we're rescuing a child. So they would get the same benefits, they would get the same support as if it was a traumatic on-scene accident. And then in 2002, we had one province. So then the other provinces started to bring me in as the firefighter cancer expert and the lawyer. And I was brought in because I was able to assist the government in the scientific arguments, because now we're collecting scientific information. And what that scientific information showed is the more we got into it, the greater the connection between occupational cancer and firefighting. So we went from one province for today, to make a long story short, we went to every single province, and now every province in Canada has some form of occupational cancer support for its firefighters. Okay. And the template is 19 cancers are deemed to be occupational in nature for firefighters in Canada. And the story just doesn't end there, because I had went into American jurisdictions, a number of United States that I had went into and I had assisted in there. And the country of Australia brought me in 2011, and we were successful in getting the full country of Australia covered under the same legislation that was based on the Manitoba model that was created in 2002.
Okay, there's many thoughts that I would like to pick up. So the first thought was that what was really instrumental in this whole process was the ability of the unions to make a change, actually.
Yes.
where would you find, because there's unions around the world, and there's obviously different approaches. Some people say it's very good that we have unions. Some others say that, well, sometimes unions don't necessarily represent all the interests of all workers and so on. So what was can you identify what was the strength of the union that you had, that it was so impactful? Because to change legislation into this kind of presumptive legislations, it's quite a change.
Yes.
I mean, it's obviously, well, it is and it isn't connected to money, because it's always cheaper to prevent than to cure, isn't it? But it's a long-term vision, and very often when we speak to politicians, they rather tend to have a short-term vision, because they don't have the certainty that they will be in power after this or that period of time that they were elected to. So it's oftentimes a very difficult discussion, especially that we do not constitute a large group of people compared to the population.
Right.
So when you start to think about voting and stuff, there isn't much impact. So
that's a very good point, and I think I got to touch a bit. My union, the International Association of Firefighters, is the largest union in the world for firefighters. Mm-hmm. It is an organization that represents almost every single urban professional firefighter in Canada and the United States, representing just over 330,000 members. And what our union did is we worked with the politicians, we worked with the medical professionals, and we assisted them to the tune of millions of dollars in regards to studies, in regards to political campaigns, where we were able to get the ear of a politician, because we're very political in Canada and the United States. And you are right, like, this is pure unionism. The reason unions were created was not necessarily for wages and other benefits. It was created almost initially for health and safety. Okay. You wanted to have a better quality of life.
What's it called?
The industrial age. Yeah. So what happened was unions were created because workers were being worked to death. And there was no laws. There was corporate greed that basically was pushing workers, and this was unions were created in coal mines. Were created with firefighting. These are some of the oldest unions in the world because they're the most dangerous professions. Right. And the reason that we are involved in politics is because politics impacts every aspect of us. How safe our job is based on political decisions.
It is true.
Right? So that's why this is pure unionism, because we're dealing with the health and safety of firefighters. And the International is such a powerful entity in Canada and the United States, but what it's done is it's led the world in what was called a global alliance, where we had other fire organizations from the UK, from Sweden, Finland, Australia, New Zealand. They all came together and they created this alliance using the IAFF's power and a template, and they themselves are now working on this legislation in their respective countries. So this is a powerful entity, and I know Poland has not been part of this, but I can tell you, out of all the countries that I have been to in Europe, I think Poland is the closest to getting what we have in Canada, United States, and Australia in regards to your presumptive legislation, where you have legislation created to allow firefighters that have occupational cancer to be acknowledged that that occupational cancer came from their profession.
Okay, yeah. So to follow up on this idea, is it possible for all the countries to become a member of the EIFF, or how does it work?
Well, the way it works is that it's sort of, because of COVID, it's sort of put a crowbar in the gears of the global alliance, but I think it's going to move forward again. We just have a new president in the United States that is president of the IFF. His name is Ed Kelly. Ed Kelly is a tremendous figure. He's a Boston firefighter, and he's made occupational cancer one of the highest priorities of the IAFF. We have just passed at the convention, we're even putting more monetary support into more science. We're going to be more involved done different things, and I think that there's going to be an opportunity for firefighters around the world to come to the IAFF and to start pushing this issue on a global issue, especially after what has recently happened at IARC, at the International Agency of Research on Cancer. The World Health Organization has just recently classified firefighting as the most dangerous occupation in the world, basically, when it comes to occupational cancer, by moving it into a Group 1 classification.
Okay, as of 1st July or the last day of June this year. Okay, so yeah, there's many threads. Let's try to follow up on some of them, and we'll just continue. We'll see where it gets us. So one thing you also said is that out of membership there is funding, and this funding is independent, and it's used to work with the medical profession. So this creates a set of circumstances where there's very high quality, unshakable evidence created that cannot be tampered with. Am I correct?
That's exactly true. The IAFF, through convention action, has set aside monetary support for studies on cancer. And we've just increased that amount. So what's happened is that firefighters are now able to speak at the same level of science as doctors. So that's probably the biggest reason why IARC has now accepted the fact that firefighting is a Group 1 carcinogen, is because of what has occurred at IARC, what has occurred with all these studies that the firefighters are now involved in.
Okay. So that's one important thought. The second thing that caught my attention was we briefly discussed this. If there's more and more countries that would like to get involved, because after all, I mean, we often hear the question, okay, so this is some research from Canada or United States or New Zealand or whatever. Is there any Polish proof, or let's say German or whatever? Probably all the colleagues that we mutually know, they hear the same questions, which don't really make sense for us, because we know that, okay, first of all, we have similar products. There's fire, so there's products of combustion. As you said, already around the year 2000, it was well established that there's a lot of harmful substances in the smoke. Well, way before that, but let's say there was also a shift from more natural fuels that burn in fires into more synthetic fuels, which only boosted the problem, which only made the problem more serious. I lost my thought there a little bit. So there's this. There's well, does it make sense to ask about evidence from your own country? Does it make any difference?
Like, that's really interesting. When I go to a new jurisdiction, and I'm giving the evidence to politicians, we have individuals and we have corporations out there where they don't support firefighting being acknowledged for their occupational cancer risks. And what happens is, one of the first things they say is, well, you may have cancer issues in Canada or United States, but we don't have it over here in Europe. That is the biggest piece of crap I've ever heard, because quite frankly,
it's bullshit.
It's bullshit. That's what it is. But what happens is that we have all our products, 90% of the products around the world comes from plastics. So it doesn't matter whether it's a fire in Poland or a fire in Canada or Australia. The same carcinogenic effect comes off it because of the amount of plastic, especially that it comes out of, in China, every year they're creating anywhere from 8 to 12 brand new plastics to make things cheaper to produce. And what that does is it creates biohazards. And this is not something that's new. If you look at the chimney sweeps, I always say the chimney sweeps were the original profession acknowledged for soot. they would go down in the 1780s. There was kids as young as 6 to 8 years old, and these kids would be thrown down. They would be sold from their families to these chimney sweep corporations, and these kids as young as 4 or 5 years old, because the smaller the child, the better it is to move them down into the fireplaces. And these kids would literally be put into these fireplaces with soot. We know it's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, it's benzenes, it's formaldehyde, and these children would live horrific lives. And in the 1780s, as far back as that, even when science was at its infancy, there was an individual, a Dr. Percival Potts, and he was brought in by England because it was tremendously embarrassing for industrial England that you have hundreds of these chimney sweeps that were dying very young, horrific deaths with penile and testicular cancers. And Percival Potts, and I've read some of his writings and his descriptions of this, was just aghast. He could go into the hospital, he would clean these children up, and he would come back a week later and he would notice that the bedding, the sheets and such were filthy, black again. That was because the children had not been in a chimney for weeks, but because it was still coming out of their pores. Wow. That's what it is with firefighting.
It's terrible.
So what happened was jolly old England in its industrial age, again, that's why you have unions, is to protect individual workers. They said that children could not be a chimney sweep until you were 8 years old. You had to give them a set of clothes and you had to be able to give them a shower facility or washing facility once a week.
Yeah. And send them to church
and they would still go in there and they would still die horrific deaths and such. And it wasn't until much later where it was found out that you had to have good hygiene, come back to today with firefighting occupational hygiene. So that science literally goes back hundreds of years, knowing that soot, that smoke, that stuff that you smell every time you go into a fire.
Even if there's no plastics involved.
It is going to be no plastics involved. And what plastics have done is it just made it more intense in regards to the intensity of the fire, the intensity of the carcinogenic exposure. And we are seeing that to a level. And IARC, the World Health Organization, has now just acknowledged that firefighting is grouped in the same classification as tobacco, as benzene, and now a profession is deemed to be a carcinogenic element, which is just an amazing conclusion that IARC has just done in June.
It's both terrible and fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is an earth-shaking statement. I had the honor of being at IARC. I was the only non-firefighter. I've been involved in IARC. I was granted status as an observer approximately 7 years ago, and I've been to a number of IARC meetings. And it was really amazing to see the progression from medical professions saying, well, we aren't sure if firefighting is connected to cancer, to now it's conclusively connected to occupational cancer. And some of the other IARC meetings that I've attended, they're called monographs. For instance, benzene. I'll always remember one statement that one of the doctors had said, is that benzene was studied just a couple years ago in IARC, and benzene was a chemical, it's one of the worst chemicals in the world that causes cancer. But the World Health Organization and IARC had done such a good job of telling the occupations that benzene is dangerous. A lot of the workers are now protected from benzene exposure. The doctors had said there was really only 2 occupations in the world that still had regular and dangerous levels of benzene exposure. One was textile workers in China, and the other was firefighting.
Around the globe.
Around the globe. And it is an amazing statement to say that firefighting, we are, no matter how much we can prepare, we will always be exposed to smoke, because our protective clothing cannot protect us from what kills us the most, because our gear has to be able to breathe, but it can't stop the smoke particles from coming into the suit, getting on our skin. And as we now know from IARC, that absorption is one of the major ways that firefighters get cancer
dermal,
and dermal exposure.
Intake,
So
Yeah, I think I remember a study. Maybe I will not give all the details, but there was a comparison of the components of smoke in let's say some early years of the former age and with current, and that the increase of the existing PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, that can be identified in smoke rose from around a dozen to a couple dozen. Yeah. So like there's so many new substances.
Group 1 carcinogens. There's over 24 carcinogens that firefighters are exposed to, which is really an amazing element that we go into. And one thing I want to say is, even with the advances in our protective clothing, our occupational hygiene, we're seeing occupational cancer rates increasing. Why is that? Why is our protective equipment getting better? Why is occupational hygiene, most fire departments around the world now know you need to clean after fires, because you got to get that junk off your body. You got to get those chemicals.
To avoid the
But what we're seeing is the occupational cancer rates are increasing, and that's because the toxicity of fires are getting worse than it was even 10 years ago. Building construction. 10 years ago compared to today. Today there's very little wood in wood construction. It is engineered plastic construction wood because of the cost of wood around the world. Right. They're using plastics to replace wood. Or in glue. Regards to this, and glue and all those carcinogens. Right. And that's why you're seeing so much more carcinogy in fires today than you were even 10 years ago. So this is a real tragic element, because firefighting is going to have higher rates of cancer before it gets better. We need new technologies where our protective clothing can actually block out the carcinogens such as benzene, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the asbestos. We need something to block out those particles. But it has to allow our gear to breathe, because if our gear can't breathe when we're fighting fires, we will have heat stress injuries that will be worse than what it is in cancer. Yeah. We'll have more firefighters dying on the fire ground because of heart attacks and other heat-related injuries.
Just like we were discussing yesterday on our way here, I read a study that concluded that it's not necessary for you to be in hot environment, but it's enough that you are just wearing your PPE, because it interrupts your natural ability to sweat and cool down in this way, that you first of all get your core temperature elevated, and then also your skin temperature elevated. So even if the gear is, we don't say clean, we say washed, because you can never say what is the effect of this washing. There's so many different ways that people wash their gear. Some just use regular detergents in a regular machine, which doesn't remove a lot, and then when it's washed and it's supposed to be clean, and you wear it, especially when you wear it not necessarily like there's I can say that in my country there's it's still connected to a representative feature, so to say, so obviously firefighters in their full gear, they look more representative in a way, but this is the mentality that we have to end with, because at the same time they're getting exposed to whatever is residual in their gear. Yeah. So it's a very complicated technical matter, isn't it?
Yeah, that is such a important statement, that every time we go into a fire and our gear gets filthy, and we wash that gear, we can only wash it to a certain percentage. It will still do what's called off-gassing. There will still be carcinogens within the fabric material. So every time, so let's say you use your fire gear, you go into a fire, you wash, you clean the gear. Upwards of 60% of the carcinogens will be removed, but there'll still be 40% of the carcinogens still in your gear. So by putting your gear on again, especially when you are sweating, when you are in heat, your body's going to be absorbing the off gas from your gear. So as tragic as this story is, the more you look at this, you know that every time your skin temperature rises, you have more permeable. What happens is your skin has the ability to absorb more carcinogens when it is elevated temperature. Upwards of 100% more carcinogens get absorbed into your gear. That's why when we fight a fire, let's say I fight a fire on a Saturday, and it's a filthy fire, and you take off your gear and you do instant occupational hygiene and you scrub and you get all the junk off your body and your water's black. You go home and you don't fight a fire again for another 4 or 5 days, but then on the Thursday you go for a workout. And then you're sweating heavily, and then you go to the shower. You'll notice that the water is black again because the carcinogens is coming out of your body even 4 days after the exposure. That's what it is. And when you look at the cancers that we now know is most susceptible, the bladder cancer, the filters of the body, those are the filters of the body that gets rid of that crap out of your system. And as it's filtering the carcinogens out of your system, over time it breaks down the cell. You get cell manipulation, and that's when you get the tumors that create the cancers, such as bladder cancers, leukemia, etc.
So also one tricky issue is that because of the requirements that are set for firefighting gear, we are also using some chemicals to, not us, the manufacturers are using some chemicals which help them reach some levels of performance that is required by international standards. Like there's this EN 469 standard that describes whatever kind of performance is expected from the turnout gear, the pants and the coat. And some of the requirements are water repellency, but also resistance to chemicals. And it's obtained by using a impregnating agent. Is that the word in English?
Like putting the chemicals within the textile.
And we found out that's actually what's supposed to protect us is also a harmful substance, isn't it?
That's called PFAS. PFAS is also called the forever chemicals. These are chemicals that get into your body, and it takes a long time for your bodies to filter it out. And while those chemicals are in your body, it manipulates your cell, and over time we now know that it causes cancer. This is a big issue in North America. I can tell you that our union, the International Association of Firefighters, have now taken on this battle because we're trying to push manufacturers to make gear without putting in these dangerous chemicals, because we now know that the PFAS is throughout our gear, because it is a very good chemical for waterproofing and other elements that the gear needs. However, that in itself is a carcinogenic response. And that goes to the level of danger that firefighters are at. Every time you put on your gear, even if it's not going into a fire, let's say it's a false alarm, or you're putting on your gear for a vehicle accident, you are wearing that gear, and there's off-gassing from old exposures, and there's also PFAS, that chemicals within the gear that's getting on your skin. And that gets absorbed, and that's a chemical exposure.
Even if it's not a significant amount, we have to remember that we keep doing this for years and years, dozens of years sometimes. Like you said, you've been a firefighter for 33 years. I mean, unless something happens, this is the time that people spend on this job, isn't it? Like around 30 years, some even more.
One of the tragic ironies of our job is our firefighters, when they get hired in Winnipeg or Boston or New York, they're going to stay there your whole career. You don't change careers. Once you become a firefighter, you stay in that career until you retire. And when the manufacturers say, yes, there is chemicals in the suit, there is PFAS, but it's such a small amount, it's not going to affect you. They don't realize that that small amount is a cumulative effect of 20, 30 years of exposures. And that puts us at a higher level. And I've read studies to show that between the ages of 20 to 40 years of age, your ability to fight off those cancers, your immunity level drops off by 50% from the age 20 to 40. By the age 40 to 50, it drops off again another 50%.
Right.
From 50 to 60, it drops off another 50% of what is remaining of your immunity.
So like 12.5% of the original.
Exactly. And when you're 50, that's why you're seeing enormous numbers of cancer that are normally cancers that are made for, that usually impact older individuals in their 60s and 70s. We're seeing firefighters get these dramatic cancers in their 40s and early 50s. So not only do we get cancer at a greater rate, we get cancer much earlier in life. So it affects our quality of life, and it affects the quantity of life that we have. It is a tremendous irony that this job that we love so much is really so hard upon us. And I guess ignorance really is bliss, but the more I study this, and the more that I'm able to look at these studies and communicate these studies with the medical community, the more I am learning that we're just touching the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
It's going to get worse before it gets better when it comes to firefighting cancer health, because we still have not created technologies that are protecting us from the cancer exposures.
And also, I have to say that there's a tremendous difficulty in explaining to firefighters, educating our firefighters. Well, since we are who we are, there's also the very important factor is we've always done it this way, sort of, you know, saying, which causes that the longer serving members of the firefighting community have usually more to say or are more influential. So the service itself, I would say, is very immune to change, so to say, because it's psychology. People feel like they are being questioned, even though they did not come up with all the ways that we are doing things. They identify with them because it's the old ways. The old ways are very good often. We sometimes come up with a new tool, and then we say, well, it's not as effective as the, let's say, nozzles. Yes, like I'm going to speak at the conference about straight streams, because we've discovered the fog nozzles, and let's throw away the straight streams. No, it doesn't work like this. Let's use everything. But it's so difficult to make a change, especially that if you get your finger cut off, well, that hurts, and you lost your finger. That's immediate punishment, so to say. That's immediate consequence. That's a better word. With cancer or with the diseases that are developing over time, it's not so, immediately obvious unless you really educate yourself. Then there's connection if you are exposed to CO, carbon monoxide. I heard there's connections that because it has the ability to deteriorate your nervous system. So Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all these kind of diseases are also connected with this exposure. So that's a very
there's two issues. The one I want to go into first is what you have said, culture. Our fire departments, fire services around the world is steeped in culture. And in some ways, that's part of the issue in having to deal with cancer, right? The other issue I want to talk about in a second is exactly what you had mentioned there about the other issues in regards to the fighting of cancer and firefighting. But when you look at the culture of our departments, of our fire departments, they're resistant to change. I'll never forget when we first put the presumptive cancer forward, and when we have this legislation that names firefighting as the only profession in the world that has actual legislation that allows a presumption that if you get cancer, you're covered. There's great responsibility for that. We need to do everything we can to minimize that legislation. And one of the things that we did, one of the first things we did is that in North America, many firefighters would wear their turnout gear into the living quarters. Would put the turnout gear beside their beds, and these were unwashed turnout clothes. These were firefighting equipment. We had to stop that. We told the individuals, you can't bring your fire clothes beside your bed at night. You cannot bring it into the living quarters. And there was pushback. But what stopped that was that we have also acknowledged all our fire deaths that from cancer. And it's really amazing how many classes, a fire class would come after 25 years and 50% of their class would have cancer. And that in itself is what has driven a lot of change, is because people realize, holy smokes, there was 12 people in my class when I graduated as a rookie, and 6 of those individuals, by the time we've hit 25 years of service, have come down with cancer diagnosis. That in itself gives us credibility in making change. So there is always going to be that cultural change. I agree, 100%.
So, 2 things. We recently had a very big achievement, I would say, and what I would like to also do is acknowledge the role and the activities and the decisions of the current authorities of the State Fire Service of the Republic of Poland, because one of the very recent changes, like it was communicated maybe a week ago or something, 10 to 7 days, is that first of all, because I'm working with in a problem team for the National Fire Chief on, let's say, broadly understood cancer prevention. So we're focusing on technologies for washing, on procedures on the scene, in transportation back to the station, division into clean and dirty zones, technologies for washing, and so on, many aspects. But so we issued a set of guidelines to organize clean and dirty zones in your own fire department, fire station, trying to be as universal as possible by explaining the key points that we would like to achieve, or that should be achieved. So the key point is like you minimize possibly to a 0 or close to a 0. I don't know if it's possible. We would have to check. The possibility of contamination in the areas designated as clean. So no more walking in with dirty boots, no more taking your stuff, only one way of entry to the fire station of the contaminated gear, that is through the garage, and so on, so on. No eating, no drinking from open containers in the garage, and so on. We allowed, let's say, bottles of water, because the hydration is also an important factor of immunity against different factors. This is what we know from our doctors. So there's a number of these guidelines that we proposed, but in the end we made all the fire chief understand that what they need to do is actually analyze what are their possibilities, because we have some buildings that are already historical buildings, so you cannot change a lot in these. And people were trying to say, oh, we need tremendous amounts of money to make this happen. And we said, no, you really don't. I mean, you just try to understand what you can do.
Yeah.
Whenever there's a chance, there will be funding. But until the funding comes, you have plenty to do.
Yeah.
That's culture, that's education, that's setting up procedures, that's setting up boundaries, that's saying you cannot do this, you cannot bring your gear here, you cannot push your dirty stuff into the cabin while you're returning to a fire station. These are so many things that you can do. But really what I like to say is that the fire chief agreed, so we prepared a proposal, and he used that proposal, and he sent a letter to all the fire chiefs. We have this, what I say, pyramid-like structure. There's one national fire chief, 16 regional or provincial fire chiefs, and over 300 of district fire chiefs. And he said that well, it's a little bit like military structure. So he's giving an order saying that your firefighting garments should not be used otherwise than for training and for interventions.
Right.
So that's very important, because shift changes. Every day you have a shift change. We made, for many years, and probably it's happening around the world, we made firefighters wear their gear, because at the same time there's a form of inspection. Is it functional? Let's say you don't have holes and no other threats. But we came up with an example of how to do it in another way. You just put it on a special hanger, and then the shift commander can visually see it's all good. You have your gloves, everything's complete, okay, and you wear station gear and you change shifts without this.
Right.
So I think that's a very strong point, because there's both great enthusiasm, but there's also coming, words of criticism like, oh, this is too much. I mean, is this necessary? What are we going to do when it's when we have to remove snow and it's cold and so on, I'm saying, yeah, well, even from the firefighters themselves, there's opposition, you know. So there isn't anything more important to me than this, you know.
The one thing I will say is that I was in Poland a few years ago with your fire leadership. Your fire leadership gets it. It is tremendous what Poland has done. Like I said, Poland is moving along the same lines as Canada, United States, and Australia when it comes to occupational cancer recognition, your occupational hygiene, your policies. Your fire leadership gets it, and I just want to applaud them for that, because that's not the case in many countries around the world. Right. One of the things that I found was interesting is a few years ago I wrote a book. I co-wrote a book about this issue with some of the leading epidemiologists in the world. And my book sold all around the world. It was within 16 countries. It was used in universities for occupational health textbooks. And the 4 top countries in the world that bought my book was Canada, United States, Australia, and Poland. So I always find that interesting. That just goes to show just how much your organization really wants to make change, because that is that was a groundbreaking book where you had a firefighter working with epidemiologists talking about occupational cancer, how you can minimize the exposures, what are the dangerous chemicals, what are the type of cancers that you have to be careful of, etc. And that's what that book did. And I'm going to I'm hoping at the end of your podcast you'll be able to put on my card, so if anybody around the world wishes to connect with me.
So here's the podcast magic. Of course, it's only for those of you who are viewing this on YouTube, but if you're listening to this on any podcast, you know, service of your choice, it's in the description. And now there's a display over here. Alex, I would like you to make your hands like this. We're now holding the Alex card here. What it says here is your contact details?
Yes, I will have my cell phone, my email, and such.
This is production magic.
Okay, perfect.
All right, great. Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to comment on. There was another thought. Maybe it will come back. I'm normally making notes, but since we were setting up all of this and we started recording this podcast.
This is such a big subject. Like, I've given lectures for 2 days on the science alone.
Right.
And what IARC has showed is we're only touching the tip of the iceberg. Not only cancers, but we're also seeing that there may be impact of the carcinogenic exposures to our families. So we might be putting our families at risk. We see that some studies even suggest that some birth defects of children, of firefighters, may be connected to the occupational exposure of firefighters, because when it goes into your body, it goes into your children's body, and especially with women firefighters. There's been tremendous amount of information coming out about women's firefighters, especially with shift work and such. And we now know that women firefighters get impacted maybe even greater than their male counterparts on some of their reproductive elements. So that has something that we're just looking into.
There's differences in physiology that can cause, let's say, temporary immunity decrease, I suppose, yes? Like with the hormonal changes that women undergo every month and so.
Right, postmenopausal women have a harder time fighting off the cancers when they're working shift work. The one thing that I always say is the first thing you should do if you're diagnosed as a firefighter with occupational cancer is you got to get off that shift work, because I've sat in on those meetings about shift work and how hard shift work is upon your system, upon your immunity level, your ability to fight off the cancers. You need to get off shift work and get legitimate sleeping conditions while you're fighting the cancer.
Yeah, so in the previous monograph, I think it was monograph number 98, if I'm correct, there were 3 factors identified as conducive to cancer. That was painting, which is obviously exposure to chemicals, firefighting, and shift work. Now we connected 2 out of the 3 identified, yes, in one profession.
And the IARC has just looked at shift work again, and we discussed firefighters, and we discussed women firefighters in particular, and the impact of occupational cancer upon our sisters in the fire service. And it really is another level of research that we have to gather, because again, we're just starting.
Right.
We've just acknowledged, the World Health Organization has just acknowledged that firefighting is the same level of danger of other carcinogens such as benzene, tobacco, and any number of other Group 1 carcinogens.
Right. And in your legislation, in the group of 19 cancers, you have specific female cancers.
Reproductive cancers, yes, because the reason that was passed in Canada is because women should not be penalized because you do not have the numbers of women firefighters. To make a good study, you have to have an enormous number of subjects. Unfortunately, women are not highly representative within the fire service.
Just like all firefighters are not represented in society.
I had sat on a study out of Australia. It was the biggest study ever done of firefighters. It was over 150,000 firefighters. And they looked at all the firefighters in Australia, and even in that study, we did not have enough women firefighters to make a statistically significant conclusion about women's
scientific standards.
Right, because it's a 95% certainty.
Recently, I also read, coming back to what you said, recently I read was an article or maybe there was a study also available for reading, saying that in a given American fire department, they had identified an increased risk of cancer among children of firefighters compared to the other children in that locality. Was a city or town? I don't
Genetic
remember.
Defects,
right?
Through carcinogenic exposure.
That's one thing, but also it's so common, especially I suppose in America. It's a part of culture and tradition that, let's say, families visit their loved ones in their workplaces, and a firehouse is always such an attractive place to visit. There's these big cars, and every child wants to wear a helmet or touch the equipment. It's so powerful. I have many visits. I did many visits of children from kindergartens. Even my children from their kindergarten group in the fire service.
And you would put a helmet on them, or you?
Right. Well, since some time we don't only using clean, very like not only clean but never used gear for these purposes. But children like it so much, because if you tell them that this scissors, what we say, these cutters, they can cut through any vehicle, they will like, oh really? Yeah, and they're so, like kids like us, and we like kids, but at the same time we have to remember that it's so difficult. There's such a difficulty in terms of cultural change, but perhaps, or not even perhaps, surely this is not the best place for children to visit, especially that when they're young, the organisms, they have decreased immunity against all the factors.
One of the concluding statements that I'll make is I'll tell a story about our profession. One of the things, I've traveled all over the world. I have been to dozens of countries around the world, talking to fire services, helping governments to create legislation. And one of the things that I found is it doesn't matter whether it's Poland, whether it's England, whether it's Iceland, Australia, Canada. Firefighters love their job, and they're very happy. It is a very strong brother and sisterhood, and we all get together. And it's amazing. Even when they understand the dangers of our job, we still love our job. And I just want to tell a quick story here, just as a way to conclude this. Right. In 2002, Manitoba became the first province in Canada to have government recognition of occupational cancer, and we had a spokesperson who was dying of occupational brain cancer. He was 50 years of age. His name was Rick Stoico. He was about 50 years of age. He had no genetic predisposition to cancer. He was in perfect health. He was not a drinker. He was not a smoker. He had good diet. There was no other reason why he would have cancer like that and so aggressive. So he was a spokesperson for us. And when we passed the legislation in 2002, he was with me as we were doing our media, because we were trying to promote this across Canada. So we were doing major media press conferences, and he was with me. And I'll never forget the time, one of the final press conferences we did together was, we were in a press conference, and you have to remember Rick was diagnosed with brain cancer a few months before. He was told that it was terminal. He had just come out of a surgery where they tried to remove his tumor, and he had decided that even though he only had a couple of months left, he wanted to help firefighters that were coming after him to get this legislation. So he was a spokesperson. And one of the questions that the press asked Rick Stoico was, they said, you know, like, this occupation that you love so much, what do you feel about it now? It's basically taken your life. You are going to die because of your job. You must hate this job right now. And what is your thoughts on other individuals who are thinking about becoming firefighters, and now that we know it's so dangerous? And Rick Stoico paused. You could have heard a pin drop in the room. And he says, you know, I've talked about this a lot with my family. And I can tell you that I've loved firefighting so much. And I've told my family that if there's such a thing as reincarnation, he said, I hope I come back as a firefighter. And that's what this profession is, and that's why I've done this for 25 years to promote this around the world, is that firefighters are going to be fighting fires. Firefighters are going to get exposed to carcinogens. We need to protect the firefighters in every way we can so they have proper compensation. We need to protect firefighters so they have funding for proper occupational hygiene. We need to invest money into technologies that are going to help us fight cancers so that our gear can protect us from what kills us the most, and that's occupational cancer. And that's why we do this. So who's ever listening to this, if whatever country you're from around the world, contact me. I have been dealing with this for 25 years, and we all have to work together as brothers and sisters from all firefighters around the world, because this is now a global issue around the world. It doesn't matter whether you're from Brazil or Africa or China or Asia or Canada, United States. We are dealing with this. It is a pandemic in some ways. The number of occupational cancers that we're getting is skyrocketing, and some countries don't even acknowledge this. They don't have, third world countries don't even have proper equipment. They don't even have occupational hygiene. We need to educate the world's governments to look after their firefighters.
All right. So as Alex just mentioned, there's so many things you can discuss within that general topic concerning cancer among firefighters. We've been talking for over an hour, or around an hour. I think it went really fast, and we would like to probably discuss a lot more. But what best you can do is, as I said, as Alex just said, get Alex on board, contact him, and ask him to come over. It's not a difficult thing to do, believe me. I just did it, and we're having a conference tomorrow. We're really hoping to make a change, you know, be impactful, and so on. That's why we are also recording this podcast. We have some accompanying, you know, ways of trying to move from different angles, like we're doing this coffee, that we're having a small income that we are entirely dedicating for cancer prevention campaigns, mostly educational. Yeah, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just want to also congratulate you. The work that you've done in Poland to be able to push this issue using the charity. There's so many other individuals across Europe that are doing this as well, and I just want to thank you for what you do for firefighting, because if Poland may be the first in Europe to get proper compensation for firefighters, that could be something that could be used for countries all across Europe, the European community. So I congratulate you in what you're doing. Just amazing work that you guys have done. Polish firefighters, you should be very proud of what you've done here in Poland. You are far ahead from many countries around the world when it comes to occupational cancer knowledge. So congratulations to the Polish Fire Service.
Thank you. Well, for me it's very personal because I worked in smoke for many years, even more probably sometimes than the average firefighter, because I spent so many years working as a compartment fire behavior training instructor when we would go to, you know, hot fire exercises 5 days in a row, for example, for prolonged periods of time, and overheat and get exposed and so on. But let this not sound strange, but was my intention to actually thank you, Alex, because you've been doing this for many years. The life choices that you took opened a great opportunity for you, but you have used this to every last possible, you know, in every possible way that could be used, I suppose, and people like you, like Anna Stets, who's supporting us greatly also in Poland, who's doing tremendously important work, who's influencing basically the global situation by working with organizations such as IARC and other, and IAFF and other organizations, are the people thanks to whom this is actually changing. Because as you said, everybody loves a firefighter, but we're not so many to actually change things on our own. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure talking to you. I'm looking forward to a great day tomorrow.
Yes.
Then we're going to have a little party afterwards, because, you know, life isn't always about, you know, important topics and sad things, but also about, you know, having fun. It is said that once you're happy, once you have a meaning in life, then your immunity also increases. So find the meaning in your life, do something meaningful, you know, engage with fantastic people like Alex here, like many others, and yeah, well, I guess that's it. We'll call it a day. You can hear the jingle in the background again, just like in the beginning, and yeah, that's it. We can wrap it up here. Okay,
perfect.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
All right. Now,
Well, that went really well.
right, it was, yeah, we could really talk for
We could
more
talk
and more.
for hours and hours.
Right. I'm just gonna pause it here. It says 1 hour and 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Good,
Yeah,
yeah.
you don't want, you know what? What they say if you're, you shouldn't talk more than an hour. People will get full, but that's a good, we hit a lot of subjects.
Right.
That was good that you gave kudos to your fire service in Poland, because you
Zysk ze sprzedaży kawy Ogień przeznaczony jest na programy profilaktyki nowotworowej strażaków. Kawa Ogień. Razem walczymy z rakiem. Projekt LIDER. Ambitnie o straży i nie tylko.